everyone, and welcome once again to the Open Mic, Writers in Their Own Words, where every show I talk to writers about the art, craft, and business of writing. From New York Times bestsellers to folks maybe just getting their work out for the first time, the Open Mic is about and for writers and the experience of writing and publishing in the modern age. The show is available on YouTube and as a podcast via all of the major platforms. So whichever one you're on, you can subscribe to that one. Or if you really like the show, you can subscribe to both. That would be great. That way you'd never miss a thing. And it's a good thing to do that for several reasons, like having my guest today. She is a thriller and psychological suspense author. She's the author of the award-winning Gabriel McCray thriller series, which features the tortured Los Angeles police detective Gabriel McCray as he deals with cases that challenge him both physically and mentally. That is admittedly a somewhat benign description, but I promise you we're going to get into that this whole series a bit more here in just a few moments. We're also going to talk about her new book, The Devil and Daniela Webster, which takes a fresh spin on the classic tale of a mere mortal's interactions with, well, you probably got that from the title. In short order, my guest today is the fabulous author, Laurie Stevens. Laurie, welcome to the Open Mic. Thanks for being here today. How are you doing?
Great, Rich. It's great to be here. And thank you so much for doing this show and the format that you have. I've enjoyed it myself, and I'm really honored to be on it. So thank you
well,
very much.
I appreciate that a lot. And as we were talking before we came on the air, I do like these things to be conversational, and I really do want to have a venue where writers at whatever level can learn something from other writers. And I find I learn a tremendous amount about writing from other writers. Both now I'm a reporter and an editor by trade, so I listen to other podcasts with journalist friends of mine. But this one in particular, I learned so much listening to you guys and getting to ask questions. I feel like, the luckiest guy in the world because I get to ask questions of writers who are really successful. So I appreciate folks like you coming on and sharing these insights. So let's get into it because I really did. I wanted to start with the new book, The Devil and Daniela Webster, which I believe came out in February. Correct me if I'm wrong there. But tell us all a little bit more about it.
Okay. This one I did as a departure. It's twofold. I think in this day and age, authors really have to be very prolific. And I tend to be an author that takes time writing my books. I'm OCD, so I want everything to be really perfect. So I'm going to do a year's worth of research, and that's a hard nut to crack when you're talking about writers that are now putting out books every 3 months. And we won't even talk about writers using ChatGPT, which is changing the whole game, right? So I put this out almost as a placeholder, but I really, really wanted to do it as a way to depart from psychological thrillers. You go to a dark place when you write psychological thrillers, and The Devil and Daniela Webster was my way of doing a little humor, seeing if I had some humorous chops, so if you will. And I hope that I succeeded. So far, the people that read it really like it. And I also have started a new series, which I call like the biblical series. So, it's taking passages and messing around with the Bible a little bit. And this was a spin on good and evil, as you said earlier.
Well, I've read enough of it to say I like it a lot. It's got it's fast paced and it's witty, the humor. I also noted this is a take on a classic tale, The Devil and Daniela Webster, which I remember reading many, many years ago. But I think, we've seen lots of these kind of stories over the years where, a human being is being confronted with the devil, whether it's from, music, and Robert Johnson and the Crossroads and all that, and movies and books, staged, etc. I remember seeing a movie with Elizabeth Hurley playing Satan, which I loved. I thought about that a lot as I was reading this, right? Because from the description, I had this image in my head of Elizabeth Hurley.
I
Um,
was always thinking Nicole Kidman, that she would rock the part of Daniela.
oh yeah, she would be another one.
Yeah.
So the inspiration was to break away a little bit from, the dark psychological humor or writing, let me say, but how about the humor? Because that does seem like a real departure for you to do something that's a little satirical and definitely meant to have a much lighter edge to it.
You know why I wanted it to be lighter? Because we are so scared of, and also even in the Gabriel McCray books, they take on trauma and fear. And I thought, enough with us running around scared of things. What if there was a way to turn fear on its head a little bit? And in this respect, the character of Jake in this book, The Devil and Daniela Webster, he he's actually kind of a sad kid in the beginning. He's a sort of failure to launch. He lost his mom. His father ran away a long time ago, and he's really alone in the world. And he doesn't have much of an anchor. He's not fully tethered. Along comes Daniela, acting as a middle-aged woman, so she won't get noticed. Okay, there's a little play on that, and her whole thing is she just wants a break from hell for a little bit, but then she gets involved with this kid, and it was so much opportunity for banter and playing on the whole, is hell any better, that kind of thing. And what happens is they form an unlikely friendship, and I won't go any further, but it is ultimately a story of the power of love, and that God's in there. And I didn't know really how to handle God. Like, someone once asked me, how were you going to take on the subject of God? How are you going to personify God? And all I did was I just made him Morgan Freeman. I mean, Morgan Freeman comes in, and obviously it's not Morgan Freeman. It's some God dressed like Morgan Freeman. If Daniela can do it, then so can God. And that took that whole weight off my shoulders, because everyone already knows Morgan Freeman to play God. What was it? The Bruce Almighty
Yeah,
and
yes,
Heaven Almighty.
yes. It's so funny because in a work in progress of my own right now that's with an agent. I'm fingers crossed. I made some reference to somebody having this Morgan Freeman like voice of God. So yes, that image is in our heads now. It'll be very disappointing if I die someday and I find out that the voice of whatever is not actually Morgan Freeman's voice. That's going to be very disappointing, I think.
Yeah, if I don't see Morgan Freeman wearing a white suit, it's not like, wait, who are you?
Right, exactly. Oh no. Things have gone very badly here all of a sudden.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the Gabriel McCray series. He's an interesting character, and I refer to him as being tortured, and that's because he suffered, pretty significant childhood trauma, sexual trauma. He's dealing with severe PTSD. He sometimes ends up being the suspect in the very crimes he's investigating. You know, he is a tortured soul. So tell us a little bit more about the Gabe McCray series.
Well, back when I was researching it, it was very offensive to me that psychotherapy had a certain attitude toward male sexual abuse. Females are always known as the victims. And when there was kind of not a bigotry, but it was very tough for guys to talk about something that had happened, and it was so rampant. You would hear stories about it. You would talk to men, and they would admit that something like that happened to them when they were children. And back when I first started getting the ideas, it just wasn't talked about. This was before the whole pre-scandal and everything, and of course that brought a lot of it out to the forefront. So I was very interested in the subject, and I I really wanted to put it in a way that people wouldn't be so scared of, but they could talk about it. And one of the best emails I ever got was from the mother of an inmate. And she said that her son had suffered the same kind of abuse. He had become a perpetrator, unfortunately. But he said that the psychotherapy in the books actually helped him because when they're incarcerated, they don't get a lot of mental health help, which is what so many of them could benefit from. So many people that have made mistakes. So that actually made me feel really good. That, like I said, was one of the best emails I've ever gotten.
Well,
Yeah, I tried to make the therapy very true to life. I worked with a lot of psychologists and people who specialized in this arena.
well, I wanted to talk with you about that because your background is interesting in that I know I'm sure we both know many authors who write cop series who were former police officers or maybe even currently police officers. But you never were. You've never been a cop. So tell us a little bit more about your background and how you came to write this series. How did you decide to write a psychological thriller with a police officer as the main character? And then how did you go about the research when you were creating this character?
Well, I've always been interested in criminal justice. I just didn't have the guts to become a cop. I just wouldn't. That was totally like not what my family would see me as at all. And I went to college. I went to UCLA, and I was theater film, but I took a lot of psychology classes. I was thinking maybe I would go into becoming a psychologist, but the more I delved into it, the more I realized you really have to learn so much about what other people's theories are that there wasn't a lot of room for creativity. But I did study Alfred Adler a lot, and I really liked because he had a theory about the criminal mind, and I resonated with that theory. So I did do some background of my own. I had background of my own in education, but also because I didn't want to do what the psychiatrists and psychologists had to do, I just wined and dined them and befriended a lot of them. And they gave me, I mean, I remember one friend came over with all her books that she got her PhD with and just dumped them on my front doorstep and said, have fun. And she also gave me her notes that were all about PTSD and trauma. And this was quite a few years ago. So there wasn't a lot of studying being done about it. And I found it fascinating, but I got to read what I wanted because I wasn't getting tested on it. So the other thing, as far as the police procedural, I have a kind of a funny story about that. My character Gabriel does the Santa Monica Mountains in Los Angeles. That's his beat because I didn't want him to be LAPD. That's already Bosch. I wanted him to be LA County sheriffs because they have a little more jurisdiction on the outlying areas of LA, especially the mountains. And so he's a nature lover. He loves to hike. And it was a good beat for him. So I remember going to the Malibu substation, which is in the Santa Monica's, and I got a lot of information from a detective there who I thought was a detective, showed me around, showed me the drunk take, showed me told me about where the detectives and how they sit and what their cubicles look like and things like that. And his name was Dan Taylor. And so when the book was published, I brought it to the Malibu substation and said, this is for Dan Taylor. And he's in the acknowledgments too. And they said, we don't have any Dan Taylor here. There's no, and I said, well, maybe he moved, maybe he got transferred. Can you look in your database? I'd like to know where he is. And they looked and they started looking at me like I was crazy, the people working the front desk there. And they just went, there is no Dan Taylor, never has been a Dan Taylor. And I just thought, okay. So I have a guy in my acknowledgments page in the first book who apparently doesn't exist. So I have no idea what happened, who I talked to, but I did get a lot of information.
Well, he clearly knew what he was talking about.
He knew, yeah, because I've had other police. I did get to work with a fire captain, though. A good friend of ours is a fire captain and a retired LA, and another one is a retired LA County fire chief, and they helped me out with in the first book. The Dark Before Dawn has a lot of arson in it, and I got most everything from them. But Dan Taylor, still don't know what happened with that.
That's hilarious, actually.
Oh my
Well,
God.
well, my brother is a cop. I've known many cops over the years. Had friends came in law enforcement, and I'm sure I'm going to have to share that story with somebody and say, so what likely happened there? Was this a perp who just had been in so many times to know what was going on? I mean, what was the gig there? How did that work out for
I
them?
don't know. And I could swear he had given me a card. And when I went back, I dug through everything trying to find that card. Could not find the card. And I remember seeing it printed. I'm thinking, maybe I'm the delusional one. And I just had some weird, I don't know. I can't explain it. And I don't explain it. Anyways, on another subject, you're lucky to have had a brother who was in law enforcement. I had a niece. I still have a niece. She switched careers, but she worked for the LA County Coroner's Office. So all the a lot of the forensics I drew from her, and she helped me put a real human perspective on it. My character, who's the medical examiner, is Ming Lee, and she's a little cold, little because she had to detach from everything that she sees. My niece, she could not be as cold and detached, and it just she said she didn't want to deal with it anymore.
Yeah, we were talking about prison healthcare. My daughter is a mental health professional, and she worked in the San Mateo County jail system for several years, and now she's back up this way now. But it is true that prison is where people get the majority of healthcare, mental healthcare in this country, and it's not enough. It's not anywhere close to enough, and it never could be because there's just so many needs there, and it's not what jail is supposed to be. It's what it has become, but it's not what it's supposed to be. So, yeah, it's a really tough situation. Sounds like though the Santa Monica substation might have a ghost. Maybe that's a story. The ghost cop.
I do not know. I started thinking that I was crazy, but then I thought, where did I get all this information from? I didn't dream it.
Right,
So
absolutely. Well, and just a little side note for anyone watching or listening to this who's not from California, we're not natives like us. Santa Monica, well, Los Angeles County is gigantic. It's really, really big. So there's a very big difference between LA City PD and LA County Sheriffs because of how just ginormous the terrain is. And the Santa Monica Mountains are gorgeous. That's a beautiful setting. We were just actually, my wife and I were just in Topanga Canyon for a week last December, and a bunch of hiking in the Malibu hills and everything. So it's a lovely area. I really recommend you visit it if you haven't at some point. But anyway, back to writing here. The international thriller writers, I love this. A lot of folks who are members will contact me wanting to get on the show, and I've had many on the show, but I've never had anybody have this in their CV, which is they said that you, quote, cracked the code, unquote, of writing psychological suspense. So first off, congratulations, because that is one hell of a compliment. And the second, what does that mean? You cracked the code. What were they trying to say about your writing?
that was from a review on The Mask of Midnight, which was the third book in the series. This is it. And I guess the reviewer liked it a lot.
He did,
I definitely pulled that excerpt from there. I can only imagine that from a writing perspective that I kept him turning the pages. And that's what you want with psychological suspense. And you really not only page turning, because a thriller, a dead ahead thriller like Speed can have you, turning pages. I don't even know, was Speed ever a book? Might have been.
I don't know.
But I always refer to that as a dead ahead thriller because bomb's going to blow up, going to have to save the world, at least save all the people on the bus. But with a psychological thriller, you're going to go into why Keanu Reeves on the bus is afraid of moving objects and now he's in one. That's the whole key of a psychological thriller is whatever world your character has to save, it's going to be an obstacle to one of his mental issues. He's going to have a halt to that. So
Right.
that's the only thing I can think of.
Well, again, that's a big congratulations because that's really high praise to say you've cracked the code on something. That really means you made something accessible, which is what we all want to do with writing, is make it accessible. And as you know, have people keep wanting to read it. In this day and age in particular, when you only have a few pages at most to catch a reader's attention, whether it's an agent or an editor or just your normal audience, that's definitely a good thing if you can keep them turning the pages. There's always this debate too about women writing men or men writing women, and it goes beyond that. People writing outside of their cultural, whatever cultural group they fall into. There's a lot of that. I don't want to get into all that right now, but I am always interested in the debate about authors who write characters of a different gender. Many of the authors who've been on this show are men who write women. I've had many women who write men. And so, I've asked these kinds of questions before. You're very adept at writing a male character. What are your thoughts about this issue? And for writers who might be looking to write a character that's another gender, and maybe the approach you take to it so that you feel that you're getting it right.
What's funny is we just had this conversation and I was on the panel for writing in different voices. And it was meant to be kind of a talk about men writing as women, women writing as men. And there were people in the audience who started saying, well, what about cultural appropriation? And what about, what gives you the right to write in that respect? And it did become sort of a political conversation. So it is a hot topic right now. I never thought it would be. And I guess for me, because I was going to write about this subject of male sexual abuse, my main character had to be a man. I could have easily done it about a woman, but to me, I don't mean to sound non-sympathetic, but there's been many books written about that. And there's a lot in the news always about that. Like I said, women have made victims in books and movies, but not so much men. And I think I felt there was a real need for it. So I had to write as a man. Now, how was I going to execute that? Well, I asked my husband a lot of questions. What's it like to have to shave every morning? Do you like it? Do you look forward to it? Do you hate it? Is it a hassle? Is it part of your routine? What's it like to stand up when you pee? It's just my poor husband got harassed a lot. And because I wanted to know those kind of things, I couldn't write it from a woman's perspective because I had to think like a man. He did say, if a guy's in a restaurant and a good-looking girl walks by, he's going to look at her, So I thought, okay, well, I got to remember that too. So there's a scene where in the Dark Before Dawn where Gabriel is looking at Ming when they are first, they're just friends. But as she gets up and walks away, he's like, yeah, she good, nice, And because I thought that's normally not something that I would do as a female per se, not saying that females wouldn't do that. Just me personally, I probably wouldn't. I might look at a guy's face and say, oh, he's good looking, but I wouldn't look at him as he's walking away. And I said, but I better put that in for Gabriel because he's a man and he wants to do that. But on that note, things did bleed in and lines did get blurred. There was a creative writing class at UCLA that dissected my first two books, 2 different semesters. And when I came back and got to speak to the class, they surprised me by asking questions like, did you purposely put in those role reversals? We know that Ming is the breadwinner and Gabriel he makes money, but his salary is much less than hers. Also, she seems to be more cold and, emotionally detached, whereas he's more emotional. And I'm thinking, I just was stunned. I went, role reversals? Because that was not my plan at all. But you can see that the yin and the yang. And I did say, oh, well, yin yang, little bit of this, little bit of feminine into the masculine, a little masculine into the feminine, never hurts anybody. So, but they did catch me off guard when they said that.
Well, I
Because I
found it
didn't
interesting.
realize it.
I always find those things interesting because, I make a decent income, but my wife is an engineer and she makes a lot more money than I do, and it has for a long time. I have never cared one iota about that.
You shouldn't.
My wife does not cook. She's a danger to herself and others in the kitchen. I do all the cooking.
Yes.
I am probably far more, well, again, my wife's an engineer. I'm an extroverted Libra. So, we defy a lot of those roles too. So when I see that, I didn't know if it was intentional or not, but and my wife's not cold or anything, but she's an engineer. She's very analytical, and she's very driven by things that don't drive me at all, and so and vice versa. So I thought it was great. I love to see that, and one of the things I think that I've heard a lot from readers and from writers alike, more talking about cultural appropriation, but I think even gender things is it's not so much that a writer can't do it. A writer ought to be able to write about anything. It just, do your homework and make sure that you're not stereotyping people or you're not, and especially the cheap stereotypes, the easy ones. Those are the ones I think that really catch people in a bad space, right? Where I don't know if you ever, I'm trying to remember the movie As Good as It Gets with Jack Nicholson and
Is it Helen Hunt?
Helen Hunt.
Yeah.
And Nicholson is the curmudgeonly, awful human writer, and somebody comes up and says, "Oh, you write women so well. How do you do it?" And he's angry about something. He says, "I write it the way I would a man, and then I remove all reason and accountability." And it's a great laugh line, right? But it is.
Well, because he's so mean.
Would do, right? You would.
Yeah.
Now, we were watching a show on Netflix, the new one that's getting a lot of play with Kerry Russell, the diplomat, and we only made it through a couple episodes. I said, I can't watch this anymore. And my wife said, why? And I said, she's the most unlikable main character I've seen in a long time. And I said, I swear, I really feel like I have to go look up the writing staff, because this makes me feel like they must all be men, because they're writing her the way men, I feel like the way men would see a woman in that situation. Well, it turns out I was wrong. 95% of the writing staff were women. But even then I thought about it later and I said, yeah, but I still think they're writing her the way they think a man would believe a woman would act in that situation. I cover politics. I have never seen a woman behave like that in my 30 years around state and federal politics. I have never seen a woman behave the way that character does. Long-winded way of saying, I think you do a good job of it, very good job of it.
Oh, thank you.
It's a tough one.
It is a tough one.
I admire anybody who can do it. So anyway, we can get off that one. You are a hybrid author. Smooth transition there. You're a hybrid author, which means, of course, you do both traditional and self-published books. I believe you also have a publishing company, correct?
Right.
Tell me a little bit about how you got there, and then maybe what are the biggest pros and cons of the indie versus traditional publishing worlds for you?
I would be happy to. first of all, I did everything. I wonder if I have the book here. Yeah, I went I had written The Dark Before Dawn, and I remember I went to a writers conference and Sue Grafton was there, the late Sue Grafton. And I told her that I was thinking of doing it myself. And she said, please don't. Just try to get an agent with it. And because it takes a writer 7 books to become good at what they're doing. And if you haven't done your 7 books, this is part of that 7. So don't put it out. And I thought, yeah, but you got your start when you were like 21. I mean, I don't know when she published or wrote her first book, but it was a different time, and the world also has gotten much more competitive. The pool has gotten much more diluted, probably because of self-published books, I would say. And I did try. I went to a few agents. I didn't do the 100 agents that a lot of people say you got to do. And I read this book. I have it here called Book Proposal. I even took the guy who wrote Book Proposal out for lunch. I wrote a beautiful book proposal, tried to send it to agents, publishers. I just didn't get anywhere. And again, so then you hit a crossroads. At that time I had co-wrote and co-produced a play that ran 8 weeks in Los Angeles. And one of the songwriters in the play told me, oh, I just got published. And I went, you don't even write books. What do you mean you just got published? He had written something and then it was published. And I read it and I'm going, how the heck did this guy get published? And he said, I did it through something called Create Space. It was brand new. So I went on Create Space and it was through Amazon. They don't even have Create Space anymore. I think it's just KDP Publishing now. And I went, you know what? Okay, forget the other thing. I'm going to do this. I'm going to put it out and see. I had a friend who was he used to design rock posters, and he did the front cover. So it is a little, I guess what you'd call maybe a little psychedelic. I don't know, but I mean, the guy, he's a wonderful guy, David Vieira, and he used to design rock posters. But anyways, so he did the cover for me, and I had Create Space publish it. Back then they used to hold your hand and we'll lead you right along. And I put it out and I did really well with it. It got good reviews. I had a Kirkus review done and it got a starred review and it was put into the best of indie. And then I wrote the next one and I did that again myself. Same designer. This is the LA skyline, actually, maybe can tell. And I did pretty well with that one too. Didn't get as many reviews, but it won the IPPY for the Silver IPPY, which is the independent publishers. They do a whole thing in New York, and that was exciting. I mean, there was like 500 people in the room. It was a to-do. And so at that point, I got a BookBub feature and I got something like 70,000 downloads and it hiked all my ratings up in Amazon. And at that time, I was also a member of ALLI, which I forgot what it stands for, Alliance of Independent Authors, but it's based out of Ireland.
Okay.
And I think the woman's name who runs it is Orna Ross, at least she used to. And they put out something that A.M. Heath in London they would consider independently published books and try to get them sold to traditional publishers for worldwide rights. So I sent the 2 books, The Dark Before Dawn and Deep into Dusk, to A.M. Heath. And I heard back saying, it was a rejection, but she said, the market's really tough right now. You mean, we all hear that. But they were tremendous reads. I'll never forget her British kind of thing. They were tremendous. So then I sent her a copy of the Amazon rankings and I said, are you sure you don't want to be part of this action? And she immediately sent me back a contract and said, I want to be part of that action. So I signed on with A.M. Heath. So now I had a legitimate agent. And within, I don't know, a month, she had sold them both to Bertelsmann, which was Random House. More technically speaking, Bland Valet, which is the German Random House. So it went out, got great reviews. The guy that translated all of J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter books into German did my books as well. And I have a friend who actually just called. If you heard that that ringing in the background, that was my friend, and she's German, and she read the books, and she said he did a fantastic job, because you know that if you say the cat's out of the bag in English, we know what that means. But someone in German, you can't it has to be the German equivalent of that saying. And she said he nailed it every time. So the gist of the book was never lost. And so that was very exciting. And then I put out the next ones myself. And from those, I ended up getting an agent. I signed with Michael Connolly's lawyer. I got a book to film agent. And we're just still trying. I think they've been optioned 3 times, the series. Hasn't gone through because everyone likens it too much to Bosch. Now, my husband and I read the Bosch series. We watched it on TV, and I have read a couple of Bosch books. I don't see any similarities other than they're both in the LA area as cops, and they're both about cops. So
Well,
I don't know, but
Harry Bosch is a
feels
little tortured. He's got the whole thing with his mom. But
right.
not the same as Gabe McCray though. But well, actually, I was going to ask this question later. Let me ask it now, because it probably does address the pro versus con thing, because you've actually laid out the pros and cons already in a way. So let me just ask you this one, because I feel like, and I think I hear in your voice, I know I hear in my own, that I think writers are more frustrated now than they ever have been, because the publishing industry has been winnowed down to just a handful of major houses. I think we call them the big 5, though I even know writers are calling them the big 4. We have agents who I think are overwhelmed, but they're also seemingly uninterested in anything other than books with mass market appeal. I just had this conversation with an author whose show's going to run tomorrow, Joe Clifford. And how agents tell everybody, oh, we want something new and unique and fresh, and then no, they really don't. They want something that is just like something else so they can sell that, which I
Exactly.
totally
They want to make a
understand.
sale.
I'm not going to criticize them for that, but that's the disingenuousness of that, I think, is also legit. And there's only a very small number of authors I know that are able to make a living at this. And yet, at the same time, there are more legitimate pathways to publication than ever before. We know self-publication is much more legitimate than it ever has been in the past. So with all that in mind, those pros and cons, do you think things are better now for writers than they were maybe 10 or 15 years ago, or are they worse than they were 10 or 15 years ago?
Gosh, that's a loaded question, because we're just faced with it. In some ways, I kind of yearn for the days of the gatekeepers, where, because you had at least a shot at bat, you didn't have so many things going against you. With the advent of self-publishing, the pool is very diluted. If, like, the person I wrote my play with was a guy named Ronnie Jacobs, and I always called him my writing mentor. I had pulled him out of retirement. He was a writer, producer, director on shows like I Spied That Girl, The Andy Griffith Show, Mod Squad. He was a big guy, like in the 60s and 70s. Then he retired. I met him, pulled him out. We did this play together. And he always told me, Laurie, the cream will rise to the top. As long as you have a good book, you're going to get noticed. I don't know if that's so true. I don't know, because of the onslaught of data and content coming at you, and coming at these agents. Like you said, I feel bad for the agents because they're getting an onslaught. Is it better now? The opportunities are there. I mean, think about this. You hardly need an editor anymore. You've got Grammarly, you've got ChatGPT that will edit your books. But then again, you've got it's worse now, even with the technology, because of another, I know I'm darting around a lot, but another panel at the California Crime Writers Conference featured a publishing panel. And one of the editors made an interesting point and said, I am getting flooded with articles, because he was a magazine editor, articles and stories not written by humans. They're written by AI, and I'm now having to implement a way to tell if it's a human writing it or artificial intelligence writing it. He says, I'm almost getting adept where I can tell because of the way the phrasing is. But his point was, it's taking me away from being able to look at real people's articles. I have to concentrate so much on how do I manage the flood, because he said he gets something like 800 a week, or I mean, just an amazing amount, because what people are doing is they'll put in the idea into the chat GPT. It will write the article, and then they'll just mass market it out to every magazine, because all they care about is, I just want to get published. I just want to get published. I want to see my name in print, my name in lights, whatever. And it's tough, because if you're a writer who's just writing books and you just want to have people read it, we're dealing with a lot now. So yes, in answer to long-winded answer to your question, I kind of miss the era of the gatekeepers, because there was always competition, and the chances of you making it were that small too, but at least you had a chance. I'm not saying that you don't, but it's all the more reason then it's kind of the attitude of, if you can't beat them, join them. So go ahead, publish your books, publish all your books.
Right. I absolutely believe I buy in with every word of that. I mean, I think it's true that the more content it is, the harder it is to get into that really small thing. I have fellow writers, and people ask me these kinds of questions all the time too, and I always say, look, the number one thing I think for anybody now that wants to get into writing is to know what you want. If you will only be happy, there's nothing you will not be happy unless you get a contract with a New York City agent and a publishing deal with Random House or great. It's like trying to hit a moving target with a blow dart from 5,000 yards. But hey, if that's what you want, and you don't want to self-publish, and you don't want a small press or whatever, great. If you are content with varying levels going down the line until you get to whatever the bottom one is now, that's fine too. Just know what you want, because otherwise there's way too much work to be miserable at the end of it all, right?
I absolutely agree with you, and knowing what you want is great advice, Rich. It really is great advice. I mean, I'm a personal best kind of person, so I always like to challenge myself. My agent said, don't write another Gabriel book because you self-published. So don't do that anymore. And he's been telling me, write a new thriller, write a new thriller. I'll represent a new thriller. Thrillers are what you do good. And what did I do? I did what I wanted. Don't know whether someone would call this a great career move or not, but I wanted to branch out and write this biblical series, because the book I'm writing is all about AI and stuff like that. So now I've done a real departure from thriller to humor, and now the book that I'm about to put out is human consciousness versus artificial intelligence. I feel there's a need for it, just like I felt there was a need to hear about male sexual abuse and what damage it does to men. I feel that there's something I have to say, whether that's a horrible career move. You're saying do what you want. So I'm doing what I want. It's my life. It's my choice. I want to do this. That said, I am writing a thriller after this one, and I do plan on giving it to my agent. So now, whether by that time he's like, who are you again?
Right.
That's the chance you take. So
I'm glad you brought up Chat GPT. I feel like I need to make a little commercial here, because regular viewers know I promised a while back I was going to be bringing a small panel discussion, just a couple of authors who regularly use Chat GPT, artificial intelligence, not in their writing, but in some of their other stuff around writing. Unfortunately, one of them got COVID and had to take some time off, but we're getting that rescheduled now. So I will be bringing you a future show here very shortly, probably within the next month, where we talk about the real tools as you use them, the dangers associated with people who, what it's doing to the market, that kind of a thing. So, stay tuned. So, thank you for talking about that, because I think that is it's becoming the topic of the year now.
It
I
is.
only
It's
have
a
a couple
hot topic.
more. I'm sorry.
It's a hot topic for
Yeah,
sure.
absolutely. And I have friends who teach at the university level. I have friends who teach high school, and they're dealing with it with kids turning in term papers. Hell, I had to teach a semester when I was working on my master's because we all had to do it. And hell, even then, and it was just a speech presentation where you teach kids how to give speeches. Even then, there was plagiarism and all that stuff to deal with. I can't imagine what AI is doing to that now. I mean, God, I wouldn't be a college teacher now for my soul dependent on it.
I
But
know. I don't even. You should get a couple university professors on just
yeah,
to interview them and find out, because I would be interested and wonder. I guess they're going to do what this editor that I heard speak do, which is they're developing algorithms to try to be able to tell the difference between something AI generated. And I have used Chat GPT to check grammar and to be like a thesaurus. And it's interesting. It is limited, believe it or not. But what's amazing to me is how fast it teaches itself.
yes,
That's what's going to blow our minds away. And if we
yes,
don't start using the other 90% of our brains soon, I'm just thinking this is something we should really try to work on.
absolutely. Well, I only got a couple more, but I blathered on too long about some other things, so I'm gonna have to ditch some of the things I wanted to ask you. But before we get to the last question, I want to ask you this one, because this is another thing with writers that sometimes drives me a little crazy. I see lots of authors on social media, whether it's Instagram or Twitter or Facebook or whatever, and all they ever talk about is their books.
Mhm.
And I'm not sure that helps them sell books, right? I am of the belief that I think the more you engage with your readers, audience, aside from just your writing, it probably helps sell more books. That seems to be what I've told. But I don't know. I'm not the be all end all either. I'm not Chat GPT. What's your perspective on social media here? I
No,
mean,
you
how do
have a
you
soul.
yeah. How do you go about dealing with your social media presence in the world?
I
As far
find
as it relates to your writing.
I find it's funny if I put up just a picture of a book and say, "Okay, buy my book." I don't, I don't get as many likes as if I put up a picture of myself doing something. I think that social media is really about being social, and it's not it is a great sales tool, but I think what my what I would tell authors is try to think of yourself as a brand, and you want to sell your brand a little bit, and that's you. That's They want to know who you are. They want to know what you do, what your writing space may look like. They may want to see your cat, they may want to see your dogs. People love dogs, by the way. So, use your dogs, Rich. You got cute ones. um yeah, I think social media is meant for an interaction for people to be human with each other, which is ironic because it's totally tech, right?
Right. Absolutely. Well, I like to end on what I think is a fun question. I hope for it to be a fun question. If you've watched my videos, you know what's coming. So I like to give people three options. I can put you together through my magical, mystical internet powers with one of these three people, and only one of these three people. Who would you choose and why? And the options I'm going to give you are Sigmund Freud. I don't think I have to explain to anybody who that is. Edith Bowling Wilson, who was the second wife, actually, of President Woodrow Wilson, but who many people consider to be the first female president, uncredited, of course. because of her essentially running the country after her husband's stroke, or Janis Joplin. Those are your options. Who I can put you together for a good long chat with one of those three. Who would you choose?
Mrs. Woodrow Wilson.
Interesting.
Yeah,
And why?
because Sigmund Freud seems to me like he would have dominated the conversation and would have wanted me to listen mostly to him. And as much as I love psychology and use psychology and write psychological thrillers, so why wouldn't I want to be with the father of psychology, right? I just, from what I've read about him, I just think anyways, I feel like I would not do any talking at all. He would know nothing about me. I would get nothing except listen, 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 listen. So I wouldn't want to be sharing a space for very long. Maybe I'd see him on a panel. And then Janis Joplin, I think she was so troubled. She got fame. I mean, she was part of the 27 Club, right?
Yeah.
Died so young. And I feel like I have all this experience after her. So she would be limited. She could only tell me what life as a rock star. And probably she'd want to talk also about herself and her past and how she made it. And what, maybe I could get her to tell me about her problems. Maybe she'd want to open up, and that would be very interesting. But I think I would get more myself out of talking to Edith.
She's a
I think she'd be really
fascinating story.
interested.
We don't know much about her in the popular zeitgeist of culture, but I mean, she is a fascinating character because she really did take the reins by pretty much all accounts when Woodrow Wilson had the stroke and was very out of it for a long time, and she kept now it couldn't happen in today's world with all the media, etc. But I find it interesting that nobody in Washington at that time really chose to make the kind of case out of it that they would today as well. And yeah, I think she is a figure from our history that does not get nearly enough attention and credit for potentially holding the country together. I mean, you got to remember this right at the end of World War One. So good choice. I like that.
Well, I just also think that so many women have been rewritten out of history, or not included, let's say, not rewritten out, but not included to begin with. So I'd want to know about how she felt being behind, being the woman behind the man, if that appealed to her, if she liked it, would she like more? Would she like me to post about her on social media?
Well, and she was also a second wife at a time when, that sometimes got held against people, though. I think his first wife had passed away, though. I think that was I'm not a presidential historian, but I do know a little bit about that. So anyway, Laurie, thank you very much. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your insights into your work and into the writing industry, which is what it feels like so much now. We don't get to feel like it's art as much as we would like it to be. It's so business these days, but
Such an industry, but really keep on writing, keep being creative. That's where we
absolutely.
find ourselves.
You could be in a lot of industries, and sometimes they all suck, but this one's actually a lot of fun, and the best people, absolutely the best
Be the
people that you could
greatest
ever run
people.
into.
Who
And
doesn't like being creative? It's wonderful.
absolutely, and you'll never find more supportive colleagues than in writing. I have found that to be absolutely true, and I've been in several industries over the course of my working life, and I will just tell you, I've never been around more collegial people than writers, and I'm not sure how that came to be. Maybe it's just the creative gene draws people, but anyway,
Could be.
before I let everybody go, just the same things I like to remind you of. I said it earlier. You can subscribe on YouTube. You can subscribe on whatever podcast platform you use. If you would be so kind as to do that and to leave a nice review, it helps other people find the show. If you hate me, that's fine. I hope you like my guests. That's better. Help other people find the show. That I would really appreciate. And they would appreciate it too. And then if you haven't discovered their work, that's the thing. If you haven't done so, please go discover their work, because everybody that comes on the show is very, very talented. And I'm very grateful for that. I will say, again, the same thing I leave you with every time, tomorrow is not promised to any of us. So please go out and make today count. For my guest, Laurie Stevens, for myself, Rich Eisen, for my two dogs behind me, Stella and Pippa, we say we'll see you next time on the open mic. Take care.